It's my honor and privilege to introduce Bruce Reyes Chow, who the first time I met him on Zoom, and I said, I feel like I already know you from your Instagram feed. And so he's someone, if you follow on social media, he will be endeared to your heart forever. For those of you who don't know Bruce, he is an author, speaker, parent, consultant, husband, coach, and podcaster, and the pastor of First Presbyterian Church of Palo Alto, California. He is also the moderator of the 218th General Assembly. If you would like to see his bio in a different form, you should go to his website and check the about. He has pictures and a timeline that are very interesting and fun to check out. We are grateful to have Bruce back with us. He's been with us before here in Central Florida. If you enjoy what you're hearing today, we have a workshop tomorrow where you can get to know Bruce on a little bit more, a smaller scale, and learn from him about his past book, In the Defense of Kindness. And so if you come to Monday's workshop, you can win this exact copy by just attending and participating in that workshop. Cheryl has dropped the registration link for that in the chat. We would love for you to register and spend a little bit more time with Bruce knowing about In the Defense of Kindness. You can also hear Bruce each week on his podcast, BRC and Friends. He will be on our podcast. We're going to collaborate with him on his podcast. So check him out each week. He's also working on a new book. The working title is Everything I Believe About God. I'm looking forward to hearing about that, to see what someone like Bruce believes in God, and to check about what I believe in regards to that as well. So Bruce, we are so grateful that you are with us today. You have a lot to share with us, and I'll give you your time now. Thank you.
Great. Again, thank you for having me. Yeah, it's been a long time since I've been there. I think it's probably been over a decade, but the continuations of connections, the Presbyterian churches, turns out we're very small. And so it is good to see some familiar faces. My family has been engaged in Montreat and other things for it's weird to say decades, but that is the case. And so I have got to know many of you, and it's good to see familiar faces and things. I'm going to jump right in. I am one of those that would rather give you so much that you're feeling like, oh my gosh, it's too much, versus when are we going to end? So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we're going to go ahead and get started here. Okay, there we go. All right, so I want to talk a little bit today about what it means for us to reimagine the space in which we have been engaged in over now 2 years, and not just around technology. I'm not going to talk about nuts and bolts of technology, though we can do that on the side if you'd like, but really just about how the past couple of years have impacted us as people of faith. I'm going to share a few things with you as we go, but just to give you a little bit of a map, I'll give you a little more introduction to myself for those of you that I need to be connected to, and I think it's important for me to share my context from which I am serving. Then I'm going to share 5 disruptions that I think have created some opportunity for us as the church. We'll do some sharing after each of those. Not a lot. We only have a little more than an hour, so I want to make sure that we are able to share a little bit. And then we'll just do a few takeaways at the end, which I think are always important after any presentation, is to begin to think about what do you bring out of this, translate for your communities. I encourage you to go ahead and use the chat. Our congregation does a full hybrid service, and the chat is going the whole time, so that it's not distracting to me. I have it open on my side. I don't necessarily check it as we go, but just know that encourage you to interact on the chat as things come up and you have questions and things as we go. So let me begin, though, tell you a little bit about myself and just to give you a sense of my ministry context. So I'm a Gen Xer, born in 1969. I come out of that phase in education where you went from from typing to keyboarding. So graduated in the late 80s, learned how to code in Fortran and COBOL and all that kind of stuff. But I didn't really remember any of that of the coding piece. I loved what we did with computers and technology and what started to come out of that on the user side. So I've always been interested in that. This is one of my favorite pictures ever, only because one, I'm sitting in front of kind of an old school PC, but also I'm wearing a tie here, which I probably haven't done consistently since that time. So this is probably 30 years ago. Again, that's me. I'm super Presbyterian. I know that there may be some who don't think that, but I am. Presbyterians come in all shapes, sizes, context. This is my grandfather on the right there, Esteban de los Reyes, who was a founding member of Trinity Presbyterian Church in Stockton, California. Comes out of the Philippines, and to be not Catholic coming out of the Philippines was pretty kind of an important thing. They formed a congregation there that did not include Filipino in its name because they knew that part of Stockton was going to have a constant kind of churning of immigrants and different folks coming in. So it is one of the most diverse congregations in our denomination. It is a congregation that I considered, now looking back, a very progressive congregation, but I didn't really know what that was until I left the congregation and people told me that I was at a progressive congregation. I am at the heart pastor. This is another one of my favorite pictures before we knew how to put things in focus, apparently. This is my eldest child, who is now 25 or 26 at an Ash Wednesday service years ago. I'm a pastor's kid. My mother, Sarah Reyes, is a minister, but I joke that my mom went to seminary after me. So I graduated in 95 from San Francisco Theological Seminary, and my mother started the fall of 95. So I get to be a pastor's kid with all of the glory and none of the baggage. So, but that's my mom. I'm a church planter. I planted a congregation in San Francisco, California, about, now 20 years ago is when we started. Was there for 13 or 14 years as the founding pastor. I left before I stayed too long. Congregation that is hybrid in its culture and context around religion. If you look at that picture a little more carefully, you notice we have chairs and we have couches and we have pews in there. So kind of holding on to some of the things that are markers of who we are and adding new things that begin to push us into who we may become. And so that part of the journey is to hold on to that which is good and to let go of that which holds us back. And so it's a blend, and I've always been kind of in that space. Currently, I'm the pastor at First Presbyterian Church of Palo Alto. It's a congregation that is an older church, and it's not an incredibly diverse congregation, but trying to share its progressive values into a community that is pretty not churched. If you've ever heard of Robert McAfee Brown, this is the congregation that Robert preached from. So this is the congregation I'm serving. I've been here for 3 years now. So most of my time here has been during the pandemic. Pretty comfortable on the socials and have been leading online worship for now over a decade. A few of us used to have a worship service on Twitter, which we ran every Sunday afternoon after we did our in-person worship. I have no idea how this started. It just kind of ran its course, but have been doing this for a while and continue to help our congregation figure out what it means to move through pandemic in a new way. So I'll talk a little bit about that today. I'm a parent, 3 kids. Most Presbyterian groups do not know what this picture is. If you know what this picture is from, though, put it in the chat. You get bonus points. If you can figure it, I'll share with you later what this is. It's a picture copying a group, music group out there. And we're empty nesters now. This is how we empty nest our first night after dropping our kid off at college. So we're pretty party animals there. And I'm, like many of you, trying to navigate COVID with as a church. So there you go. There's a little bit about me. Glad to be with you all. It's important for you to get to know, for me to set my context. So I'm going to jump right in, though, and talk a little bit about what we've all been experiencing these days over the last couple of years. Um, so I want to lift up to you five disruptions, but I do want to say that one of the things that it's important for us to acknowledge is that we are leading these communities. We are part of these communities that are experiencing a really high level of tension and stress and trauma. And while we like to put a facade on that everything's good and we're able to get through it, we're not going to manage our way out of this. We're not going to plan our way out of it. It's not that we don't make plans, but we need to realize that some of what we have to do is simply continue to adapt and figure out how the Spirit is moving at any particular time, and not pretend that we are going to be able to manage in clear steps through these moments. So what I do think we could do is we can see this as a time that we change and grow, and it is an opportunity. I use the phrase it's been revelatory. That I don't use the phrase silver lining. I think there have been far too many people who have suffered and died and who continue to suffer during this time of COVID. But it's revealed many things about us as communities. And if you are like me, it's revealed a lot about who we are as leaders and what it means for us to be called to serve the church. And so I see this time for us to embrace it as a moment that we can name and understand things that have been shown to us over the past 2 years. And I think part of this is that all the disruption that's happening in the world has given us permission. In fact, if you haven't shifted, we haven't been listening, right? There's almost a mandate from the world to figure out how we engage one another and interact with one another into the future. So I see disruption not as a negative at all, but as a signal and a symbol of a time where we are called into thinking about what is next. So let me talk about our first disruption that I want to lift up to you, and it is about who is centered and what is centered. How do you talk about space and the ways in which you may gather or interact? Primarily, this impacts us during worship, but it's also about meetings and engagement and how your community gathers and connects during the rest of the week. The images you see now are two there. Want to talk about the first one is just some random picture I found on Google, and the second one down below is just a screen grab from one of our worship services. So in the top one, the centered space is the physical location, right? It is the location where things are happening, and we're all kind of transported into that space. In the lower one, right, the space is not the physical location. The space is this kind of third space, this kind of space in the congregation of just people gathering on a particular platform. If you look at the bottom one, this is before we had a hybrid service, but we always, the second square right next to mine is a camera from our organist up in the choir loft. And so we have slowly begun to think through how our congregation sees the space and one another. But what has happened is that our understanding of space and gathering has changed, and it is reinforced in many ways what it means to be community. I don't know how many of you have ever explored bounded or centered set thinking, but it is a concept about how we connect with one another, and how we go about thinking about how we are connected. The bounded set on the top there is about how we see one another, and it's a kind of a regulatory piece, not in a negative way. Like, what do we agree upon in order for us to gather? What does it mean for us to be together and have common understandings and beliefs and sometimes rules and norms and all that? So in a worship setting, for instance, our common bound is that you would be in the sanctuary, you would be in that space. And so that was just what it was, right? A common bound, a bounded set is something like session, right? Everybody's ordained to be a ruling elder. A bounded set could be a book group. It could be lots of things. So it's not necessarily negative, but it is regulatory, right? It is a way we understand our connection. We have come through a common set of rules. The centered set is, do you simply care about the same things? Do you have a shared passion around something? Have you shared an experience? There's a common belief. It's more relational. It is not as much, you can't everybody say, oh, this is why we gather exactly together because of this, a book or an ordination or a building, and it is much more relational. The way that this gets modeled for me the best is that I'll be this happened multiple times. I'll be at a cafe or somewhere outside, and there will be somebody who comes up to me with a friend, and they're like, oh, this is Bruce, this is my pastor, and this is a person that maybe has come to church once or twice, and they introduce me to their friend. It's like, oh, this is Bruce, my pastor, and I'm, in a bounded set. I'm like, well, I'm not your pastor. Like, do you come to church? Do you give? Do you like all these things that make that relational more regulatory? Whereas they are connecting with me because they shared a worship experience once or twice. And so now they see this as their community. So part of that is being able to see that people are connecting to us in a little bit different of a way. So part of what I think this has forced upon us is to think about the geographic connections that we have and what it means for us to be community today. As many of you probably have experienced in your worship, as you have been forced into an online experience, you're connecting with people that are outside your geographic area. The bounds of your geography are no longer limiting what it means to be part of community. This, in many ways, is exactly what we say when we're at the community table, right? We are not bound by walls or borders, that everybody is welcome to the table. We're now being forced to actually live that out. What does it mean to have a table that is not bound by regulatory things and or the sanctuary? So to begin to think about, what is the space that you are trying to create? What is this almost the third space that I'll talk about in a little bit of a hybrid experience and culture that will help people connect beyond some of the ways that we normally do? All right. So I'm going to I'm going to stop sharing and just, we won't be able to spend a lot of time with each of these, but how has space changed for you? Have you tried anything different? Have you experienced anything that has magnified or emphasized how space has changed? Is there anything that you have seen? I would ask that go ahead, you can put stuff in the chat, but I would also say feel free to unmute. If you would introduce yourself, that would be awesome, and maybe give a little bit of context. So this first one, space, centeredness, connection, how has that influenced your congregation or the place you serve? Or you have any tips or tricks? And again, there's a lot of people here, so unmute, share real briefly, and then we'll take a few people. So go for it. We just need one person to break the ice.
Hi, I'm Carol Pate from Grace Covenant Presbyterian in Orlando. Our space has changed some with our Sunday school class. We do Zoom and we do in person, and we've done Zoom since the pandemic started. So we do open up more by doing it with Zoom also.
Great, Carol. Have you found more connection and attendance, less, the same? Like, what has been just the engagement level of people?
I think there's more. There's some attending that have not before because they can come via Zoom.
Right. Great. Thank you. All right. Others? And again, go ahead and interact in the chat as well if you'd like, or share in the chat. So, or others want to share verbally, go for it.
Hi, it's me, Dean. And I'm serving actually in a parachurch ministry that's interesting. We are a temporary emergency shelter for homeless women and children. And I've been there for a while during this pandemic. I think what's interesting there is that we already had sort of a community feel, home-like feel, tried to make it, not institutional in general. But I think with the pandemic, it became even more kind of community, family type feel within a house, in the way that people just kind of had to come together in that sort of family feel. And how are we dealing with the crisis? If it had been a few years ago, people were already dealing with crisis. I mean, they're homeless, but kind of how and why they're in crisis now, and the ways that they have, especially the women there and the kids actually with each other, have really supported and cared for each other, and the way our staff has done that and done ministry with them. very positive in a lot of ways, in interesting ways.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I mean, so part of all of this is just figuring out for every context about how your space has changed, because it has, right? The way, whether we've acknowledged or figured it out, whether we're comfortable with it or whatever. Just seeing, Patricia sharing in the chat there, just about, keeping people connected and that technology gap that happens, and how do you make sure that you maintain that and understand that that is going to happen. We have found that just being able to support people through that and not make a lot of assumptions and keep things really simple helps with the technology gap as well. So thank you all. Keep sharing in the chat. I have a lot to share today, and I'm not going to get through it all as usual. So I'm going to keep going and push through here and share again, Disruption 2. So this is, I think, important, especially around worship, but also around other meetings, is to reimagine rather than replicate. I think what happened a lot when we began this time is whether our meetings or our worship settings and things kind of got shaken, we had to go online. What we did is we thought that what people need or want was to do exactly what we were doing in person and just put it online. And I actually feel like that it's a missed opportunity if we haven't adapted to the platforms that we're using or the space that we're using. I think about this all the time. If you were in a congregation and your sanctuary is being redone, remodeled, and you need to meet in the fellowship hall now, so you move from pews into a space that you have chairs, like your worship begins to change, or it should change, because now you're in a different space. You're in a way you can be a little more creative and flexible than what you used to do before. There's just a disruption that allows you, if you look in the chat, right, there's a disruption that allows opportunity for beginning to think through how you might do something differently. And so what I'm encouraging people in this thinking of the way that our worship has been disrupted, our meetings have been changed and shifted, is to reimagine what those now look like. What we used to do may or may not be as important as what we thought they were beforehand. And so that leads us into then, what do we do next? Because we've been challenged now to rethink how we go about worship, how we go about meetings, all of these things, that we've done them a little bit differently now because of just the ways in which we've engaged. This is not, again, not just about worshiping meetings, but lift up pastoral care as well. A few things that our congregation has done that's been a little bit different, right? So we have communion every week. We did not have communion every week before pandemic hit. And now, as we go back into an in-person hybrid experience, we have communion every week. We felt that this was a personal passion of mine, that we wanted to, get communion to be elevated rather than it being a scheduled kind of practice that happened once a month on the first Sunday every month, but to really begin to see that communion is something that is a weekly nourishment for our bodies, minds, and spirits. And so we just began to do that as soon as we went online. It was a way to acknowledge the connection to one another. Now, if you could imagine any congregation having to go through, before pandemic, the conversation about communion every week, and you can already hear all the reasons why we don't want to do it. Well, when you shift into a different way of being, you're almost given permission to just try different things and realize that things are a little different. The way that we collect offering, I've always believed that passing the plate is one of the most unwelcoming things that we do in our worship services. And obviously you can't do that when you're online. Well, as we go back in our hybrid, we're not passing the plate anymore, not just because of COVID risk tolerance, but also because we have discovered new ways of giving in our congregation. Like many have been very generous during this time and have done just fine without passing an actual physical plate. And so that's when our prayers are different now. We have prayers that are offered in a variety of ways from a variety of parts around the country every morning, as well as now from inside the sanctuary. And we have begun to rethink. So we have, Ash Wednesday was just this past Wednesday. We sent out ashes to every member of the congregation, as well as had them here. This year we thought about what it meant to be in such a time when we're thinking about our mortality. We have all been thinking about mortality for a long time these past couple of years. So we joined with many who are using some common curriculum around ashes and stardust, and so we put glitter in our ashes and sent them out to people and used it to begin to think about our mortality as not just about the dust, but about stardust and about the universe and how God has created all of it. So there are ways that we recreate some of what we have done before, and we reimagine the things that we have had before. I'm going to ask you real quick. I'm not going to be able to share after each of these, but what are the things that you have reimagined, or either meetings or worship, things that have been like, oh, we may not have been able to do this before, but what are the things that have you have found yourself doing that are a little bit different than you had before? So I'm going to stop sharing and let's share now. So ways that you've reimagined worship or gathering or pastoral care or anything like that. Feel free to unmute, introduce yourself, share in the chat.
Hi, this is Christina Greenawalt. For me, I believe that reimagining worship has allowed for more creativity in our worship spaces, so that when we're online as well, it brings people in, that artistic, more artscapes in our space, the way we do things, visual elements, more lighting elements that just really transform the space. So it's not always the same space that we walk into every week, but that God is reimagining it every week and making it a special space.
Have you found, Christine, have you found less or more resistance, or like what has been just the way the community has embraced that?
Well, I started at our church during the pandemic. I've been there a year as their pastor. And so I think they have embraced that change more than if I had already been there maybe, but they have really just appreciated it and liked it. And it has brought people into our congregation from Canada and different states and things like that, and who have stayed with us even when their churches opened up. So, and then we got this, Rockledge was doing it, a midweek prayer service. And so that has really changed and really centered us on prayer instead of just the once a week worship, having that additional worship service through prayer.
Great. Awesome. Others, anybody else want to share? There's great stuff going on in the chat as well, but others want to share a little bit about how you've seen some reimagining going on for you in either worship or gatherings or anything.
This is Jody Mask at Markham Woods Presbyterian Church, Lake Mary, and we did some sanctuary renovation with new carpet and some changes to the chancel size, as well as we cut some pews in the transepts and made them more friendly to not face each other so much, but to face towards the chancel. And we are streaming both services every week. We've gone to offering Lord's Supper at the first worship service weekly also. So significant changes, nothing, like earth shattering, but for Presbyterians who don't like change, pretty big.
Earth shattering is always relative, for sure, for many of us. I would say a couple of things that we've also don't share is that we have basically done away with a bulletin. We haven't had a bulletin in 2 years, and we have kind of like the service that I just led in the beginning of our time. We simply just tell people that we'll lead you through, and you don't have to download anything extra. And we have moved that into our in-person, that we have a very simple bulletin. It just gives like a map of the order. And if you remember, you may still be doing, or had to go back to it, you remember how much time and energy goes into creating a bulletin. And now that folks have been used to just engaging a little bit differently, we're adapting again for people being in person and hymn numbers and those kind of things. But for the most part, that was a huge shift that I think people didn't even realize when as we were going back into our hybrid. I said, we're just not going to have a bulletin. And folks are like, okay. I mean, could you imagine 2 years ago if you told people, well, we're not going to have a bulletin, how long that would take and the kind of crisis you would have created? So I think noticing both those big things, but also the subtle pieces about how you speak about space and gatherings, I think is important. All right, we could talk about this one for a long time because I know there's a lot of creativity out there. Feel free to keep sharing in the chat. But want to continue on here. All right, third disruption is around leadership. What does it mean to invite people into the life of the congregation? What does it mean for us to use this opportunity and this time to do different ways of inviting people into the life of the church? I think we have been forced in our this new kind of technological space to ask ourselves the questions about relationships and who do we value and what does that mean. And again, I want to say that not everybody is going to move into this kind of hybrid world, which is just fine. But if you are thinking about it, this is really what I'm pushing on, because the danger is that we tell folks who have connected with us online and in our community, like I'm hearing some of you all, that attendance has been better in a lot of things because people have found the ease of connecting online, especially our seniors who have connected with us. And we run the risk of saying to folks, gosh, it's great that you attend all of our things, but that's as far as you can be involved in the life of the church. And so what I think a disruption or a challenge for us in this is to expand the way we think about who is involved and who leads our congregations. What does it mean for us to invite people into a hybrid culture? What does it mean for us to kind of connect people who are distant and present, to begin to rethink how we go about our work and our ministry? So, for instance, if you have folks that are engaging with you who may have reconnected and have not found another congregation, or folks who are not from another part of the country because they are politically, ideologically, theologically kind of isolated and have connected to you, what does it mean to build a hybrid culture that welcomes people beyond just attending things into the life of the church? So a good example would be for me, are you inviting people who may never come onto your site to be part of committees or to be part of leadership? Have you invited an elder who maybe doesn't live close by to be on session? What does that begin to look like? Our congregation, our last round of elders, we have folks that in regular times would have said no to us because they don't want to drive, 40 miles or 60 miles to a session meeting once a month. Well, we've decided that we will have a hybrid culture session meeting. So, and 10 meetings a year, 8 of those are online and 2 will be in person. And so the folks who have to drive a little bit are like, yes, two times a year I will drive in and we can see each other in person. The other times, let's be online. Now, we haven't adapted to see if anybody outside the state or who can't really get to us, what that means. But we've begun to think about inviting these folks who we've connected to into the life of the church in a different way. Some might, I think one of the things we assume is that this is about younger folks, and actually it's about, for our congregation, it's actually been about some of our older folks who have managed to reconnect with us on a more consistent basis out of either retirement communities or they just can't get out as much, but they still have plenty of life and vigor and want to continue to be involved in our congregational life. So that's one is to think about hybrid culture and to figure out how you want to continue engage in that. So I'm not going to be able to let's share. Yeah. So how have you adjusted, invited, integrated new people into leadership? Has that happened for you? What's been the struggle? Are there questions about that? This has not been something that everybody's been able to do. So how do you go about integrating new leadership, new people involved, bringing folks in you've reconnected to? How has that been for you all? Feel free to go ahead and unmute and introduce yourself and share, or put something in the chat as well.
I'll share. This is Ralph at Washington Shores Presbyterian Church in Orlando. And we have, I should put it in the share, just elected a session member who actually lives outside of Cleveland, Ohio, and is actually serving on our session as a part of our church leadership. She was a family member of one of our local members, and during our time on Zoom, joined our congregation and is now serving in that leadership role. We have our youth group expands all the way from Palm Coast, Florida, which is on the southeast part of the state, all the way up to outside of St. Paul, Minnesota. So we have youth that are attending our congregational meetings and participating actively in our youth group across the country. So we have expanded and are expanding our ministry thanks to our pastors' insight and use of technology.
That's great. Thank you. So the kids, the young people in St. Paul, do they resent you every time they see pictures from warm Florida during the winter? Are they like, we're not coming because you're flexing your sun?
Not quite, Bruce. Their grandparents live here, so they get to come every so often.
Okay, so they know it. Good, awesome. Just Cheryl, Christine, and I had one of our meetings where we were on the coast, and I was sitting outside. It was warm there. It was warm here. We can bond over that. All right, others, how have you seen or struggled or embraced new leadership coming in and people engaging beyond just attending things? How has that impacted you? Does anybody else want to share?
Hey, Bruce, this is Cheryl. Christina mentioned our Rockledge prayer service, which we borrowed from Hope Presbyterian. They got the ball started, but we actually have had some of our youth return to it, and some of them live out of state, so that's a bonus. But the interesting thing was that, like, lay leaders that we would have in the physical space of our sanctuary, a lot of people are reluctant to stand up in front of the whole church and do that. But when we do shared leadership on the Zoom prayer service, almost everybody is willing to be one of the participants in that worship leadership with us. So I think that's a neat way to, a little less intimidating than standing up in front of the whole church.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think thank you, Cheryl, for bringing that up. And there's a little bit going on in the chat around this that I think that what you've discovered are also different gifts that you could not utilize before. Like, some people are super comfortable in a Zoom setting or in an online setting, and whereas other folks, that's not quite the thing. And so somebody mentions, Christina, you mentioned on the right side there about having somebody help with deaconing. So we started early on with things that we call tech deacons, and they basically replaced our in-person ushers, who now there are tech deacons every Sunday, and we bring in for other gatherings. We're called into this space to help people feel welcome into our new form of gathering. And so there are folks who welcome people in the waiting room and help questions. And before we went into our first kind of shutdown, almost exactly 2 years ago now, they were the ones that were in people's homes trying to get them set up and comfortable with doing what we needed to do. And we've continued that piece on. So we have a whole new group of tech deacons. And now, as we've gone back to in-person hybrid experience, we have to bring our ushers back who have a different role. And so it's been a wonderful that it expands the opportunities for people to engage. Difficult because you now still have to find people to do things, which has been, I don't know how many of you all have been experiencing. People are not excited about jumping back in and getting super involved right now. Folks are tired. So trying to figure out how to balance all of that all. One of the things I think you'll have to begin to struggle with, or at least answer the question, and this is Presbytery folks in particular, is what does it mean for people to be engaged with one another cross Presbyterian boundaries? Sometimes we get a little territorial with each other, and we have to figure out how to kind of release some of that in order to be able to kind of be a community. Right now, our congregation has hired a person who's in Pennsylvania, a pastor, to work with our worship and Christian education. And our presbyteries they're like, that's interesting. And so trying to figure out how you navigate those kinds of things. So this is all it's coming, and we're going to have to figure out how we engage with one another around this. So continue to share in the chat. Good stuff, y'all, about what is going on. All right, let me keep going here with Disruption 4. All right, so evangelism by osmosis. Now, some of you may love the word evangelism. Others, you're like, oh, no, evangelism. We don't want to do whatever you imagine evangelism is. I come out of a very progressive space where I was taught that if this was a transformative experience for me, shouldn't I be sharing with other people? And we don't always have to share and do evangelism in the ways that we see others doing it, but that there is a compelling calling for us to share the version of the gospel that we believe to be true and good. And so most of us, or many Presbyterians, often do evangelism by osmosis, that people should just find us, right? They should, we have this thing that's so awesome, and people should just find us. But I think we don't, that, as you know, that doesn't happen. And so one of the things that just the biggest disruption I think that we have experienced in all of this is that people are not going to come back to church, right? That not simply because of obligation or habit. And even in the depth of our current relationships, sometimes what we're realizing for some folks is it's not enough to stay connected, and not enough to stay connected in the ways that we have always been connected. And so now I think it's a huge opportunity for us to rethink how we share what we believe, how we go about being more intentional about making sure that we are a compelling place to be engaged with. Somebody lifted up in the chat about thinking about church beyond the sanctuary. So I think you're right. It's what does it mean for people to connect, whether it is your worship experience, whether it's a gathering, whether it's your community organizing and outreach, whatever it may be. One of the things that we've discovered and realized is that obligation is no longer a driving factor. And so now we have to think about how people are engaged. Why and how do people engage in the life of the church? You used to be able to count on folks just showing up because that's what people did. You know, if you don't show up, we still have vestiges of guilt and shame that we use, and we people will come to things because they're just supposed to come. Or, but I don't think that's a sustainable way of being engaged in the church. I don't want to feel like the reason I am here is because I'm obligated to be here. I want to be here because I'm called and moved. Now, it doesn't mean that it's not going to be without struggle or conflict, or, you know, it's going to be easy, but I want to be called and moved into that space. And so we have to now, it's almost more work, is to really think about how people are engaged in the life of the church and why they go about wanting to be here. What does it mean for people to be drawn together? The congregation I'm serving, we have just gone through a huge mission study kind of process and a new mission statement. Some might think it's like insanity to do that during pandemic. Others are like, well, it's brilliant to during that pandemic because everything is revealed and stripped clean. And so, we have begun to think about what draws people to a congregation. And again, not just around worship, but about what it means for us to be together. So we have 4 pillars. One is disrupting injustice, one is seeking wisdom, one is practicing empathy, and the other is expressing the beauty of the divine. And we begin to think about why people might be drawn to this particular experience of the gospel. And so I think one of the things that has happened is that we are now going to be forced to do that. So I would be curious about how you all have begun to do that. How have you begun to think about what it means to share the church and the gospel and to do evangelism in a different way? So yeah. So how have people been drawn to your community? What have you done? Are there culture shifts you've done? Are there tactical pieces that you have begun to think about? So I'm going to stop sharing and allow for let's share a little bit. Those of you that have tried to do, and this doesn't mean that they've all worked. So you can share stories of failure as well as stories of success if you'd like, but anything that you have done, experienced that has drawn people into a larger engagement with you, go for it in the chat, or feel free to just unmute, introduce yourself, and share. There's an old pulpit joke about Presbyterians about what do we contribute to evangelism, and the preacher stands up there and speaks into the mic. What's the greatest contribution Presbyterians make to evangelism? Nobody answers. Test the mic. Test it again. What's the greatest contribution that we make to evangelism? And then finally, somebody in the back raises their hand and says, restraint. So, but I come out of like, this is the church that raised me and a good experience. It's transformative. So how have you engaged in evangelism over the last couple of years? Feel free. I know you have.
Hey, Bruce, this is Cheryl again. I'm sharing something I know about from several of our churches. One of our churches had a blessing box outside at their church. It didn't work for them, so they donated it to St. Cloud Presbyterian. It worked great guns there. So like they would fill this box with food. People in the community could just come by and either take something or fill it. So then one of their Eagle Scouts built them a bigger blessing box because it was so popular. And now the original blessing box has been gifted to First Presbyterian in Kissimmee. So it's the gift that keeps on giving. So that's
awesome.
kind of, and people are engaging that may never enter the church sanctuary. So that's kind of an interesting.
That's great. That's great. Thank you. Others, how have you seen yourself kind of stepping into this evangelism space and having people increase engagement?
Well, I'm the newcomer here. Are you hearing me there, Bruce?
Yep, we got you.
So I'm the novice among a big group of highly experienced and well-trained Christians. But we did an experiment at Hope Presbyterian Church. I'm Jeff, one of the new ruling elders. And we went in front of Sam's Club, and we gave out about 480 9-volt batteries, encouraging people to review and change their batteries, giving them a free one, but also giving out a sheet of information about our church and hinting that we'd love to have them either come and participate in our services or join us online. And it was interesting to see how many people hustled away from you as they walked out of the store, how many would stop and listen to you, how many will want to carry on a 5-minute conversation with you while other prospects passed by. So it was an interesting experience that about 10 of us from the congregation shared shifts to do that one Friday.
That's awesome. Yes. Now all those annoying beeping that happens, you can never find a 9-volt battery now. And part of it, I think, is planting seeds, right? Maybe people, if they didn't show up right away, maybe at some point they, a crisis happens or something goes on and they remember that this is a connection that you made. Thank you, Jeff, for that. And way to butter us up before you talk. That's the best thing. To affirm us this morning. So others, have you tried to do some different things to increase people's engagement?
This is Bonnie Keller from Grace Covenant, and on Wednesdays we have a special community outreach program called Shine, and we have children elementary age that come in, and they have art activities, of course, Presbyterians food activities, and just engaging the community. And what has happened is these children do not attend our church. They attend churches in other areas, or they have no church affiliation whatsoever. So it is a strictly community-based program.
That's great. That's great. Awesome. Yeah, if you haven't been able to think of things that you've done, I think we've all done things and tried some different things over this past couple of years to connect with people, and so that's evangelism efforts. But I also think it is one of those places that we need to kind of deconstruct for each other, so that we are a little bit more comfortable with how do we, in particular, in our particular contexts, feel comfortable sharing out who our congregation is and what we believe in a way to draw people, not simply for survival, but because we believe we have a version of the gospel that's good and one that is needed in the world. Because I would challenge that if you don't think that, then what are we doing? Like, if we don't actually believe the gospel that we're part of is worthy, then we've just turned this entire exercise into just a job. And that is not what we are about or who we are supposed to be. And so I think the disruption, though, has forced us to think about what parts of what we do are not meaningful anymore, or, need to shift, and what is, because there's plenty left. And so how we go about sharing that is really important. All right, I'm going to keep going. All right. So here we go. All right. So disruption 5. this is an obvious one, right? The technology that has happened. Here is my greatest, if I could give any words of advice and wisdom that you probably heard from others, is to just keep everything simple and understand what your capacity is like. Since the beginning of this, I've been part of gatherings and meetings and trainings around technology. And what I would like to say at the beginning, as I talk a little bit about this, is that there is no best way to do this. Not everybody should be or can be doing everything that everybody else is. There is no ideal technological space or hybrid space. That you need to be engaged in technology to the capacity that you have as a congregation. You have to do it in a way that is comfortable to you. I would say that the biggest mistake that most churches make is that they try to do too much. And to keep it really simple, you'll notice, for the little worship service I did at the beginning, very simple slides and a little bit of music. There wasn't, bells and whistles, not a lot of video, not a lot of things that disrupt bandwidth. So to begin to really think about not just the technological kind of tactics, but to think about it in a way that is sustainable. What's realistic is a big question for me. And this should be for all of us. So, we've all been confronted by all of this stuff, the sound and our design and visuals. And so I hope what you have done is you've been able to figure out what works for you and doesn't work for you. So let me tell you a little bit about our hybrid space. This is a picture of, I think, one of our third services or something. So what happened with our congregation is really kind of interesting. We started at the end or the beginning of Advent the way we phrased it was to offer an in-person option to our ongoing worship experience, because we knew that not everybody wanted to come back, and we were not going to center our space as the ideal way to engage in worship. So when we first opened, we had about 20 people or so show up in person and about 80 or so 80 logins be online. So we gauged that at about 100 people or so on Zoom. And we have what you'll see from our hybrid experience there. This is right before, as we're setting up, is that we just use tablets to kind of create the squares that somebody would have on Zoom, so that we don't see it as an entire large sanctuary, but you'll see that as I stand there, I'm up front. We have two tablets on our organist. So one is on his fingers and one are on his feet. So our tech deacons can toggle and we can see Andy play on his feet. And then we have a couple of so we have about 7 tablets to our disposal that would log in and and it makes it much simpler to just engage in a hybrid space. We also are really concerned about design and what it means and what things look like. And so how we go about designing so that folks can easily read slides or other things, images, all of that's really important to us. And then creating space that simply honors both who is in the physical space and who will be online, and making sure that we're not centering either one. This happens to be, we lowered our capacity during Omicron. And so what we have found, it's been really interesting. We re-engaged our capacity 2 Sundays ago and have hybrid space. And we've had about 90% of our folks stay online. And so we're now trying to figure out how do we get some more people to come back in person and not just stay online. So it's been an interesting kind of journey for us. Our online service we think is pretty good. And so people are like, okay, I can roll out of bed, go to worship and be done, versus coming in person. One of the things that has happened for us in our hybrid space is that our seniors are attending more often, but not coming in person as much as they used to. So where a classic example would be a person who used to come to worship twice a month. Well, that's not happening more, but they're attending worship online every Sunday, but they're only showing up once a month, if that. And so that's a dynamic that has hit us a little bit as we're creating a technological space for us. So our hybrid third space is trying to really blend the two. We bounce back and forth between each other. I lift up prayers from the sanctuary. You can't see the microphone, but people could go to a microphone or they lift them up from Zoom. So really trying to do what we can without being too fancy. So we didn't spend a ton of money on new pan tilt Zoom cameras, which some people will talk about. We used our current sound system and just run through Zoom and did it in a way that the sound is excellent. So we were able to just stay within our capacity for what we're doing. So let me ask you all, what choices have you made about technology, and that, you know, how have you discovered your capacity? Are there things that were creative that you have done or like to share at all? So let's go ahead and share some of that. So, all right, technology. Who wants to share?
David Collins, Palm Bay Presbyterian. Since the beginning of the pandemic, all of our services have been streamed on Facebook. And this is good because actually we had suggested this before the pandemic, because people who can't get in there, all the way people can actually see the service. So it's good. And we're continuing to do that at this point.
Great. Thank you. That's good. I mean, I think that one of the things is folks streaming on either YouTube or Facebook or your website is trying to figure out, how do you keep those people engaged? How do you interact with them? We made the decision not to stream. We are purely Zoom because our chat is so active. And we decided that capacity-wise, we just had space to do Zoom and not do all the other things. And so that was a decision that we made early on, and others made different ones. And so trying to figure out what your sweet spot is and your capacity is great. All right, others, what have you done to create some hybrid space, or to use technology, or to not use technology in a way that makes sense for your context and your ministry? Jump in.
Hi, I'm
Oh, we had you and then we lost you.
okay. I'm Nancy Gore from First Presbyterian, and we have a new minister who's gung-ho technology, and he's gotten a lot of people interested in this as well. And we have a camera and we video our service and put it on YouTube, so people can watch it live or they can watch it later at their own convenience. And talking about contributions, we've also put a link on our website so people can give electronically. And we've gotten contributions from people outside our normal church family, and it's been great.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think part of this is just how much anxiety leadership brings into the space. I mean, I do want to say for ministers, you were not supposed to be able to do this well at the beginning. Like, that's not what you're trained for. And I think there's also an element of we are not supposed to be technology experts. That is not our primary job as pastors. But I think, one, we've wanted to do that, some of us. Others have expected it of us. And so none of that is fair to ministers. I actually I talk about it as being a muscle. And there were some of us that have been using this muscle for many years before this. Others, you realized you didn't have it. And so you pulled it immediately. You just jumped in and all of a sudden realized the extent of what you could do. But I want to acknowledge that if this has been difficult, or if this has been a struggle, either if you are the pastor or your pastors have struggled, that actually should be the norm, right? You should not have actually been able to just ease into this. So I want to just name that if you've really struggled with this part, that's totally fine. And again, we are not supposed to be technology experts. That's not our primary call. And I mean, our presbytery should help us support that. I mean, there's other dynamics out there. So well, good. I'm trying to look in the chat if there's anything that's interesting. There's lots of good stuff in there. I love Robert said we made a movie studio in our basement, which in other contexts people are like, that's kind of an odd thing to do, but now, right, it makes a lot of sense to do. How do you create space where you can actually create content that is useful for folks? One of the couple of the things that we do is we do post our entire service. We tell folks our entire service goes on YouTube on on Monday. Folks want to watch that. And we have about 25 or 30 people to watch it afterwards. But then we clip the sermon and we post that using what's called an audiogram on Instagram and on Facebook, so that the sermon part is just shared as well as the church podcast. So we're able to kind of share that out as well. So lots of ways to engage this hybrid space. The piece that we try to do is not be too fancy. I just think that if you can do one thing, is don't try to be fancy. Just because you have the power to use things doesn't mean you have to. Because oftentimes the more transitions technologically, the more opportunity for things to go wrong. It's one thing I would offer. The second thing I would offer is value technological support as you would any staff position. So what I've heard from many, many technological folks who have been we have a Facebook group that's called Zoom Faith. That's an interfaith group. If you want to get some expertise and support, a lot of volunteers who started this have burned out because we leaned on them so much during this time. And all of a sudden, I have one friend who was a elder and who knew technology, and they're just like, I'm totally burned out. I feel like I have to be at church every Sunday and run technology because the church hadn't thought through that this became a staffing issue. So I think that as you think about how this goes forward, how do you staff this well? Again, your pastors are not supposed to be your Zoom hosts, ideally. Now, maybe that has to happen in some context, but find ways to support the experience. I kind of think about it in your third space. You have somebody who you probably pay to take care of your facility. Well, think about that in the same way as how you take care of this third space, this Zoom space, or this what streaming space. How do you support that space as well with your staffing? So leave you with those things. All right, we don't have a lot more time, but let me share one last thing, which I think is just as important as the rest of these. So I just want to say, I think while many places are moving through this pandemic and all of the mitigating factors, still people are dying every day. We know people are still getting sick, but I do know that, as I've started to travel again, you walk into different areas and everybody's addressing pandemic differently. I think it's important for us as leadership, whether you are a ruling elder or a teaching elder, to take seriously that we have been going through an amazing amount of trauma and stress and all of that over the last 2 years. We maybe have tried to pretend that we weren't. Maybe sometimes our privilege allows us to not have everything impact us in the same way as others. But that doesn't mean that it's any less. And so I would encourage you, as you're moving through this time, not to declare like the time is done, but to really take time to rest and recover. I encourage, if you are a ruling elder, to figure out a way to give some time and space for your pastors to rest a little bit, another week or two of vacation or time away from something to be able to recover. I encourage people. We're hearing all over across denominations that folks are tired, and this has been a long engagement in continually adapting and pivoting and all, whatever word you want to use. And so this is a gesture of transformation and courage to take some time to heal and to slow down, kind of like taking time for silence as we began our day. There's something rejuvenating about that. And so would encourage you that one of the disruptions has been for I know for myself and for many is realizing that work that we do and that we're called to takes a lot out of us. And so how do we make sure that we're engaged so that we can be more effective with one another? All right. So as we end our time, I'll ask in a little bit, but I want to flash through a couple slides here. I'll spend just about 5 minutes. Any takeaways, things that you have questions about, and if any of this. I also, I will share with Presbytery folks these slides that I'll use today, and would encourage you and invite you to be there with us on Monday as I talk about kindness and how that exists in the world. So you get to download these slides from a platform I use called SlideShare. And then if you want to connect on any of the socials, I'm pretty active on most of them. I'm not particularly good at email, but you can always email me. I say that it's in solidarity with the young adults in my life that I don't check emails. So, but I'm just not very good at that. And then if you ever want to get into my stuff, you can just go to Linktree at Reyes Chow. That's all the books and things for that. So I'm going to stop sharing and take some last questions as we end our time together. I will share one thing about, I'll share it tomorrow too, about the kindness book. If you're an audio person, the audio book just came out, but I'm not reading it. I share this because everybody needs to be humbled. I did 20 hours of recording my kindness book and turned it in, and the response was, I think we're going to get a professional. And so if you, it was a very humbling experience for me, but if you are interested in picking up the audiobook, that has come out as well. All right. Last questions, takeaways, things that you want to share. Have you, and I would, if there's a way you've taken care of yourself or your pastor during this time, you could feel free to share that. We'll just do this for about 5 minutes or so. So feel free to share.
This is Jeff Hosmer at North Lake. First of all, Bruce, it's good to see you again. I was involved with Abby King Kaiser's ordination.
Oh my gosh.
In Cincinnati.
That was forever ago.
It was forever ago. And you came and you blessed our congregation when you led that service. So thank you. One of the things that I've noted for 2 years is that this has been to the point of how wearying it is. The book, The Power of Habit, by Charles Duhigg, a great book. It's been on the New York bestseller list a number of years. It talks about how your brain operates when you're doing something by habit. And if you're doing something that you're familiar with, your brain is very relaxed. Your circuits aren't burning on all cylinders. So when we've done things in church by tradition, by habit, by norms, things that we're familiar with, it's quite relaxing for us. By contrast, over the last 2 years, everything had to be re-engineered. Everything, just as you said, has to be reimagined. And so what the net effect of that is your brain circuitry is working like crazy. And it is working nonstop on all of the issues that we're trying to navigate through. Decisions that had to be made hour by hour, in some cases early on. And I think that just reinforced for me, as we've talked to as a staff and some of the colleagues that I've been in touch with, be very much aware of how the mental drain that goes on from trying to be making these decisions. And even, we talked about aftermath and adjustments. And I was thinking 2 years ago, we would have operational disruption, and then we'd have aftermath and adjustments. And here we are 2 years later, and we're still not completely through the operational disruption. And that's why it's been tremendously wearying. And it's good for us to acknowledge the toll it's taken on us. So thanks for giving us permission to speak about that.
Great. Thank you. That's well said. I mean, I think that's the piece. I remember having meetings where well, in a month, this will be done. And then, well, in 2 months, and we keep setting these dates to give us some kind of end that we could plan for. And I think that we just have to realize that that's just not our reality anymore. So that's it. Thank you. That's very helpful. All right. Other folks, we'll take a couple more. Takeaways, sharings, how you've cared for yourself or others, anything as we kind of end our time.
Hi, Bruce.
Yep, go ahead.
Yes, this is Sharon Tatum. I just put in the chat that I really like that slide of the couches, the chairs, the pews, because it represents difference, but yet in the same space. So we can even integrate our furniture and the ends are going to be the same. It's we're headed in the same direction. We're sitting in the same space. But my chair is different from your chair, but we're doing the exact same thing. So I really like that slide.
Thank you. So that slide, I would love to say that we were super strategic about that. but we had some folks at a church like, we have a couple pews. You want them? Like, we're a new church plant, and it was during that phase where everything was cafe tables and candles, and that's kind of what you were supposed to do. And I'm like, sure, we'll take a few pews. What we discovered, though, was fascinating, is that when people who are super not churched in the Bay Area and on the West Coast, like, they've seen weird, strange spirituality all over the place. That is not something, like, I'm not going to out spiritualize people out here in California, but they stepped into our space and they saw pews and they said, oh, so there is some church here. Like, there was something about that was comforting, that was like, now hardly any of them sat in them because they're uncomfortable, but it was a visible acknowledgement that we were not just about, kind of just about the couches and the candles. So thank you for Sharon, for picking up on that. I wish we were more strategic about it, but it kind of happened to us. But it turned out that was one of the learnings that we had, was how do we blend kind of ritual and tradition as well as what might be coming? How do you reimagine what those ritual and tradition could be? So if we could all have that openness, I think that would really be like, imagine what we could do if we just had openness to how God may move into the world and move into our spaces. So thank you. All right. We are out of time. It is 8:17 it's 8:17 on my side. And now I'm wide awake. So it's good to be with you all. I will be again with you on Monday, whatever time that is for you. I think it's 10 o'clock my time, 1 o'clock your time. Is that, yep.
Yes, that's it.
Yeah, okay, great. So I will see you on Monday. Again, thank you for having me, for the invitation. And again, have a great rest of your meeting.